Hey, what's up, guys? I want to welcome you back to another episode of Street Theology. It is your boy, Pastor Adrian. And today I am solo. Normally I got, I got Pastor Derek with me. You know, again, he's Mr. Cincinnati himself. He's, steady Eddie, the Clay Thompson of the podcast, I always say. So I ain't got him in corner three, but you know what? Because we had to bring the big guns out. I had to bring the Monstars out today on this podcast, guys. If you guys are here, Street Theology is simply about this. It's all about us launching innovative reconcilers into the world. We want to take theology, bring it down to a street level. And today, as we are recording this here in Orlando, Florida. As many of you guys know, Engaged Church is a part of a collection of churches called Every Nation, a worldwide, a really global spiritual family. And I am joined today by two really good friends of mine. And I'm going to let them introduce themselves. But again, Pastor Brian Taylor, Pastor Chris. Matter of fact, no, let me back up because I'm with some very smart brothers. Dr. Brian Taylor and Dr. Chris Johnson again. And so I am really happy. Why we decided to do this podcast, because we have a group text and we're missing one member of our group text right now, but we effectively have a group text called One Night in Miami. And we're missing, shout out to Justin Gray. And so if you don't know what One Night in Miami is, just go look at it. You can just look at the synopsis, right? Amazon, look at the synopsis. But we're excited. And I'm excited to be with these men more than anything else. These men are incredibly good friends, faithful men, deeply love Jesus, deeply innovative reconcilers. But as well, again, as we talk about this, these are men who go in and build reconciled spaces, but only building reconciled spaces, they do it being who they are. Yeah. And that's really do it. So, fellas, I really, really appreciate y'all taking time to be here.
Yes, sir. Glad to be here, man.
Same here. It's
going to be fun. So pretty much let's do this because, again, I won't go through because, again, both of y'all really got deep bios. And so, I'll be here all day with y'all. So anyway, within, again, we'll start with you, Dr. Johnson.
Yeah.
Within about a minute, tell the people kind of a little bit where you at, what you do, and go from there.
Yeah, man. So appreciate being up here. I pastor church, Divine Unity Community Church, multi-ethnic, multicultural, multi-generational. And that's a big thing because I believe when we talk about the conversation of reconciliation, it is as much about ethnicities, culture, and generation. Yeah. And so really trying to see how do people come together to show this beautiful tapestry of glory, of God's glory. But then on top of that, we have this thing, we say, look, you must be a light in your location, vocation, and recreation, where you live, where you play, where you work. So location, vocation, recreation, we want to be able to launch people into that. So I look at my church like a launch pad. Because before I was pastoring, I remember getting like 3 pay stubs trying to make ends meet from the different odds and ends jobs I had. So I worked with juvenile delinquents. I also worked with convicted felons doing substance abuse counseling. And then I was in the church world too. And so I saw this gap in ecclesiology that didn't always bring it to real life. And then I saw the similar struggles that people had that were in these worlds that may have been marginalized or either been in a struggle. And I said, man, does my theology make way for folks like that? So I need to be able to minister to people who got degrees and people who got records. You know what I mean? So, and I ain't talking about disc records. I ain't talking about mixtapes, but I want to get them too. You know what I'm saying? People who could drop 16 bars, people who've been behind bars, and people who got bars on their arms, on their robe. So yeah.
That's amazing. Well, I appreciate it. And one thing I do appreciate about the work that you do, every time I go, before I got to get a chance to know Chris, it was a reminder. First time I heard Chris preach, it was in Jacksonville. Pastor Rudd, as a campus thing, it was one of our Every Nation campus ministry events. And man, he got up there and I'm like, and they're like, he's potentially going to be a part. And as soon as he started preaching, I'm like, oh yeah. Cause I could tell he started off strong talking about lordship. I'm like, oh yeah, he family. And then he gave us, and I tell you, man, that brother gave us like the greatest campus ministry hits. He gave us about an 8-part sermon in that one thing. And again, I was reminded of that this week because again, as we're here recording, you did an incredible job this past week, but we always sitting in the back texting each other. We're like, all right, I'm about to take Chris's message and break this up to an 8-part series right now. I got content for the whole fall semester.
Wow.
But it was incredible. So I appreciate again all the work that you do. And Dr. Brian, man, tell the people. I mean, me and you, man, God, we go back 20 plus, man.
Yeah, man, a couple of decades.
It is.
First of all, I have to say this about Chris though. He sneaks in bars, because even right then, recreation,
vocation, what's the other recreation?
Location, vocation, recreation.
Location.
He just said real quick, like it wasn't even anything. He just dropped a line on you, like, so.
We just added one, though. We said tribulation because everybody was going through stuff. And so we was like, nah, man, you got to stay on the grind. So, nah, man, DBT, man, it's on you.
DBT. So I'm in Cincinnati, Ohio. Been there since 2013. And it's funny because there was nothing that I really thought would draw me to the state of Ohio. That's usually not the place where people grow up saying, when I grow up, I'm going to get the chance to move to Ohio. No offense. I mean, it's a great place, but I grew up in Virginia. And fun fact, for a little while during my childhood, I actually lived in Maine. Okay. If you know anything about Maine, at least back then when I lived there, it was one of those places that when Black History Month came, everybody kind of turned towards and looked at me. And I remember
hey, brother, you just said like how it used to be. Like, hey, is it a new influx?
I haven't been there in a while. Big shout out, though. Much love, but I just haven't been there.
Maine now has melanin.
Maine has melanin.
I don't know. It could have changed, but. Teacher asked, "Did your parents know Martin Luther King?" I was like, "Yeah, I got his number right here." But anyway, going back to Virginia, and in Virginia, I was in the opposite environment, and quite literally, and trying to understand my identity growing up there, and it was. I remember I went to a point in my life where I was like, man, I want everything black, black music, black friends, black places. So that was where I was because I felt I'd come from another extreme environment and I was just so happy, like I'm home, And so I can remember, and this is all going to lead to where I am in church, but I can remember growing, getting ready to go to college. I had an opportunity to play football at the next level. And one of the hesitations in going to Vanderbilt, where I ended up going, was there's not going to be any black people there. And there's not going to be any black women there. And I think that's probably where I'm going to find my wife and get married. And so they convinced me, Tennessee State's HBCU, it's right down the street, you'll be fine. And so all of this, I think, was God preparing me without me knowing that he was preparing me for the type of church that he was going to call me to lead. And so when I went to Nashville, eventually there was a guy who would come and do Bible studies and reach out to us on the college campus as a student athlete. And I remember he invited me to come to church with him. And I remember feeling like, I like this guy, but this is the weirdest experience I've ever been in. They have words on screen. We stand up. We're playing songs. And this is, I don't know how much I could say on this. This is pre-Pastor Tim days, Bethel. So,
got it.
So,
it hadn't quite been integrated.
It hadn't been integrated at all.
No, hey,
not even assimilated.
When he say integrated, I mean he really mean integrated. Yeah. on some not just we got some other people there, but on some other even some mindsets.
Yeah. So, but even in the midst of all of that, God did something in my heart that caused me to latch on to this family, and there was something that began to be birthed in my heart. And I knew that if I was ever going to plant a church, I wanted it to be something like this. I didn't know at the time that I would, but I can remember sharing this vision to a pastor friend of ours that's known us way back when, in the days of Kojic, Church of God in Christ, which is the church denomination I grew up in. And I can remember he said this. He said, son, black people will follow a white pastor, but white people will never follow a black pastor. And I can remember thinking, it never occurred to me that this was going to be a thing. But I later learned that it is sometimes. But I'm blessed to see that while that truth, but what he said came out of a narrative that has a lot of truth in it. Yeah. I'm encouraged to know that the church that I'm able and privileged to serve as the pastor breaks that barrier, and I know the both of you all lead churches similar to that as well. Yeah. And so we're here. We're doing the work that God has called us to do, making disciples, trying to make a difference, and doing it in a way that reaches a multi-ethnic, multicultural, not just assimilated diverse church, but an integrated diverse church as well. So
I love it. No. And I love to get it back to because I want me to jump right into this question because I think for us, a lot of what we're going to try to talk about today, because everybody, knows about, we had 2020, we had this whole, this racial reckoning and everything like that. And one thing that you've seen, again, some people have woken up like, oh, hey, there's an issue still, you know what I'm saying? Where again, for those who've been black, okay, we've always known there's been this issue, but there's been a real reckoning. The one thing we're going to get to in a second, I want to focus on this podcast, like, what's next? Because there's plenty of podcasts you can listen to everybody, man, here's what the problem is, here's this, and this. You can go listen to whatever to find that. Right. But what I don't really hear a lot about is saying, okay, especially for those in Jesus space, what's next? What is beyond this reckoning, which had to happen, but what's next? But I want to ask you, before we get there, though, I want to ask you guys this question because Brian, you bring something up that's really interesting to me, and is that actually sharing, you guys' perspective in the pain of being black and leading, those, leading those who are white, because there's a pain that comes with that. On both sides, which a lot of people don't understand. There's a pain that comes with that of being misunderstood by people who you deeply identify with, who look like us, but also people who don't, out of your, whatever, trying to find this sense in the balance. But it's really hard because that's why very few people do it. I mean, literally, I can tell people, man, I could probably count 20 to 30 people who actually build like how we have in a diverse space in the way that we're building, that I personally can, and half of them are people who are a part of what we do, you know what I'm saying? But so I guess I'm going to ask you guys that because it's a real, I think sometimes people know, oh man, you guys are leading church. I'm like, it's like double. Church planning is awful. It's awful, right? It's like, listen, I've started businesses and sold, and I'll start 8 of them before I plant another church on my own, like how I did, right? But then you add on top of that, trying to do it the way we do it. So I want you guys to speak to that, real quick, the pain of that and just kind of your wrestlings and, the raw and cut of it.
Yeah. I think, it's this intersection of ministry and identity that I find, that nobody else scripted for me to discover that. And granted, I planted our church. I think 28.
Yep.
Right. So I was young. I'm not that old now, but at that space, there's still so much I'm trying to figure out. I'm trying to start my family, trying to figure out, man, I hadn't been married that long. I got married July 2011, February 2012, we was having our kickoff service. May 2012, my wife was graduating with her master's. We found out in June we were pregnant with our first child. February 2013, I'm celebrating 1 year at the church and having my first baby, and I started losing my hair. You know what I mean? So, but it was like this time of I wasn't making money. I was bivocational. You could say trivocational. And so it's like I didn't have the security of am I being a grown man? Do I have what it takes? That question was already out there. Let alone I'm doing something and you don't know the scorecard when you plant the church. Man. You don't know when you're successful. You don't know when not. And at any given time, somebody can say you're dumb. You doing something that's of the enemy, that's of the devil, or your best things to slice bread. So it's like this. It's like you kind of caught in this orbit, and you're not sure what part of this ecosystem of life where you are. Then you add we doing multi-ethnic. And then you add, and I'm black. And then you add, I don't always speak with the King's English. You know what I mean? And so, so I had a master's, but you're going to know what I mean more than you hear commas. And so then I had this place do I have what it takes as a man? Do I have what it takes as a husband? Do I have what it takes as a father? Do I have what it takes as a pastor? Do I have what it takes as a black man to do this? And so all those questions around, and it's very few people that really live in that intersection. Yeah. And so I realized the more I got reconciled within myself, the more I was able to lead out of a place of competence and confidence. I had conviction that got me started. But then, okay, how do I continue to grow in competency? Okay. But then how do I continue to grow within my confidence to do what God called me to do? And so I remember looking out one Sunday and I saw gray-haired white people. And I knew they were highly educated, had great, influence. And I had to fight the temptation to change how I preached.
So
Examples I use. Yeah, go ahead.
So speak to because I want you to go to that, because I think sometimes people don't realize that because in the psyche, and the reason why, and I want to say this before we move this, because on this podcast, the reason why we're talking about this is because, as you know, even at Engage, we're building these multi-ethnic spaces, and the mentality that actually has to be there because of it's so easy. Because I did, I started off like, okay, I got to quote a bunch of reformed dead white guys to make myself to be legitimate to people, right? And the whole point is like I come from a line, though I didn't grow up in church. My great grandfather was a preacher. My grandfather was a preacher. They're Black Baptist preachers. At the end of the day, that's like I can't help it. It's in my DNA.
Right.
And so, but I'm over here trying to be like, again, I'm trying to like, man, I like the dudes in certain camps, reform camps, trying to be that because why? Not because there's nothing against it, but in my soul, I literally was trying to feel like if I do this, I'm more legitimate. And so I think speak to that, Chris, because that's a very important thing that, that we have to fight sometimes. So,
I think, it's that sociological phenomenon of when you come in a room, you're doing the checks as saying, what is the acceptable culture? What's the acceptable norm? And then you almost start assimilating without thinking. And at some point, I recognized and said, I am tripping. God called me to plant this church. And how am I going to assimilate to the people that was attracted to what I'm doing? But so that just shows there was so many levels within that psychologically, sociologically, that I had to continue to grow in and grow through. And the other part, though, we talk about quoting, you said quoting a bunch of dead white guys, or either quoting a bunch of reformed guys, or either quoting like the Andy Stanleys of the world. And I went through this moment, and this might be for something later, so I'm trying not to get all the way in my soapbox. But I didn't have many examples that felt like me, that looked like me, and any of them that I felt like, oh, I want to be like that. I heard from those other camps them talk down about them.
Yes.
You see what I'm saying? So now I'm like, so now T.D. Jakes not a legitimate theologian. You know what I mean? Like, and so I hear them hang them out. You remember the Elephant Room? I remember watching it and cringing, and so I can't, so who can I be like? And so Paul hit the nail on the head, said you have many teachers, but not many fathers. And so what I saw from circa 2000, year 2000 to when we started planting our churches, there were no prominent Black leaders that were well represented, recognized, respected, that we felt like we could look up to. So essentially, I don't want to say we were fatherless. We didn't have the Black pastoral example in many places. And so then you start counting them on your hands. You know what I mean? And now in our movement, you got to remember when I started my church, I wasn't part of every nation. I wasn't part. So I did not know a Brad Fuller. And so every multi-ethnic church I saw, they either were in an interracial marriage or either they spoke a certain way and they had a certain typology. No shot, but I knew that wasn't me. And so I found myself wondering, where is the example? I didn't have an example.
No, Brian, I want you to dive in because I know you got tons. Go ahead. Tell me what you think about that.
Well, this goes back to some of the things that we've been working on writing in terms of the credibility question. It's the issue of, am I enough to lead you? Because one of the things that I realized, I remember having a conversation with some of the leaders in our church that happened to be white. And I remember talking to them, and I was like, have you ever been in a situation where you had to be led by somebody that had a position of leadership or power that wasn't white? In school, did you have to take any classes in undergrad? Have you had to work any jobs? Were you a supervisor? Maybe in sports, you may have had a coach or two. But in general, have you ever had to be in a position where you've been used to being under the leadership of someone who didn't look like you? You cannot grow up in America as an African American and not have that. And because of that, what I think is created is new territory when someone comes to our church. I know this because I've been told, listen, I was nervous about going to the church of a Black pastor I didn't know what your theology was going to be like.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You're already starting with a place of, I need to now prove myself.
Yeah.
And then it is not just the expectations of others. If you've been in that position enough times, even if the other person is not expecting that from you, internally, you're assuming that people are expecting that from you. And so maybe I need to throw some words in or start quoting certain people to make it seem like I am credible enough to lead in this situation. Because there's a difference between somebody liking your message and liking your sermon and saying, I'm willing to follow your leadership.
Yeah.
Because if not careful, what happens is I could be entertained by the black preacher.
Yes.
Yeah.
But not truly submit to the black preacher. So it now puts us in a realm of entertainment. Even when you look at this, even when we look at America, what are we known for? Like the entertainment.
Athletes and entertainment. Like music,
Chris Rock said it. He said, I look at my neighborhood. He said, my neighbor is a dentist.
As a dentist, I'm saying. And then he said, hey, what black people got to do to be a dentist? In my neighborhood, they had to invent teeth.
Right. And so I think that exceptional, but the entertainment component. So when you said that they could like your sermon, but like, would they truly be submitted? Or would they just pay the cost of admission but not really support the vision? I ain't trying to cut you off, bro.
No, but that's true. And you live with a sense of I'm one bad sermon away, I'm one misunderstood post away, or I'm one, away from people leaving.
I came to the plate with 2 strikes. Is
Right.
What you're saying.
Yeah. I don't have 2 strikes I don't have any foul balls to give. It's like you got to be on point.
Yep.
Until someone's walked with you long enough to where there's a trust. Now I have some amazing white brothers and sisters in Christ that have walked with me, that I believe, man, they will walk with me through whatever we got to walk through.
Yeah.
I mean, shoot, we just walked through a pandemic together.
Yeah.
So we've got people like that, but there's a level of that's not typically assumed on the front end. Mm-hmm. That's after years of building with somebody that happens.
Yeah.
So I've got another thought in terms of some of the pain. I don't know if you want me to get into it now.
Go for it.
You want to just jump right in?
Jump to it.
Okay. So I can remember having a conversation with a few good friends, mutual friends for all of us. And they're leaders in their own right, good friends. And in the conversation, what came up was, I'm not sure that it's always been understood what it has cost at times for black people, and you could say other ethnicities. I'm speaking what I know of best.
Yeah.
What it cost black people to be a part of this movement. And then the question was asked, what did it cost you? And I appreciate it because I felt like that was a sincere question when it was asked. And no, the cost isn't the same as maybe some of my friends who are pastoring in Iran or China or something, but there was a cost.
Yeah.
And part of that cost was the willingness to be misunderstood by my own people, my own family members. Okay, so are you a Republican? Mm-hmm. Are you... Okay, we don't really know them. You've come up with us. You've grown up with this. This is home. And I'm sure they love Jesus, but that's very unfamiliar. And so now it's, I know you guys don't understand it, but this is my family. I love them. I'm standing with them. Yeah. And so dealing with that, overcoming that has been part of the cost of what it looks like to be a part of the family. And it's been years of that. And so now I think we're in a place where there's times where, for some of my white brothers and sisters in Christ, are you willing to be misunderstood by your family members and by others to be a part of this and continue to walk with me? The answer for a lot of them is yes. But I think for others, it's been the question of, man, what if I get mistaken as, if I identify with somebody, we just did a whole panel on critical race theory. What if there's terms that I associate with, and now the people who are in other circles that I identify with now begin to reject me out of that.
Yeah.
And my hope is, you know what? We all got to give up something to do this.
Yeah.
All of us, because that's what coming to the cross is. But it also means for you as well, you have to give up your power, preferences, and privileges if we're going to continue to walk together. Yeah. And I think that's some of the pain when you don't feel that reciprocated. Yeah. That's where there's pain.
Yeah, because I think what ends up happening is sometimes people are like, well, because again, everyone's always like, they'll go to, like you said, in Iran and places like that where people, look, they got real, they could die for their faith, whatever. And I think the thing always, like where I go with people, sometimes I'm like, yeah, I understand that, but this is where I live at. And the fact that, you know what, every Christian in Iran is going through that. Yeah. I'm going through certain things simply because of my skin color. You know what I mean? And I live in a free country. You see what I'm saying? Like, I'm like, you can't compare it. I think one of the biggest ones I always tell people that really got me was with the election of President Obama. One of my biggest, I don't have tons of regrets in my life, but I say this is that there was a lot of things, whatever, politically I didn't agree with, whatever. But because of the world I was in, how any bit of saying anything in any positive manner toward Barack Obama was seen as you are not faithful to the gospel. And I'll never forget, I did not watch, the inauguration. And it's one of my biggest regrets because I was steeped in this place like, man, I don't want to be seen because I really love Jesus. And these are all well-meaning people. What I didn't at that point in time, what was being pushed on me. Listen, yes, everything that people had probably a disagreement was the political things of Barack Obama that went against the Bible. I did not agree with, but what I didn't realize was that I was living in these extreme places because anxiety takes you to extremism instead of living as balanced. Like, no, I can reject these things, but then say, listen, well, people don't understand the fact of seeing a black man and a black woman with 2 kids, a man who every day went home, had dinner with his children, who had no marital scandal, no nothing, of what that meant to people who look like us. That push more of family than most rhetoric people was preaching from a pulpit. Yeah. Because they could see, this couple who wasn't an athlete, wasn't an entertainer, and 2 people who lawyer, all this stuff, look at them. And the fact that celebrating that was seen as, and building in a multi-ethnic way, well, hold on now, it can't be, we're all together, it's about race. And I think I go back, that's one of the biggest pain points because I realized in that moment, in the name of trying to build reconcile space, what I realized it wasn't about reconcile space. What was being pushed was a culture, not the gospel. It was a culture. Yeah. And I tell people all the time, that may seem small to you, but I'm never getting back the fact. I'm not saying of voting or whatever, but just to watch a historical moment, I didn't do it, and I never can get that back. And that's painful, and it may not mean a lot to a lot of people, but it means a ton to me because there's not only the pain that you can see it, but there's also the shame of like, what was I doing? That's the part people don't get, the shame when you're like, yo, what was I doing? You go back and I want to slap my 2008 self and say, man, like, yo, what are you doing? Like, and so I think those are real pain points that if you're not careful, and here's why I also tell people now, and I want to move on, is that what makes this really hard too is that then the work you have to do from that, not to go down a shame cycle that allows you to lead out of bitterness. So it's this constant work that you're doing and building. And so I thought the pain of that is, it's a real thing, to kind of get through it. I think that, but here's where now pivoting to the next point though, is that, but there's this reality that all of us feel called to build multi-ethnic space. And so I think the thing for me, and I want to kind of jump into this because somebody we had on our podcast, a friend of mine, Tyler Burns from The Witness, and Tyler said this, and he was at the Q conference, and he had this 9-minute talk, was fascinating, and he talks about the power of the paradox, and he talks about the idea of being black and being Christian, this paradox, to where it's like the idea where he gets going. I mean, listen, for 9 minutes, I don't know, in a long time I heard 9 minutes a full course meal. That brother gave you a full course meal, sides. I mean, sweet potato pie. I mean, he gave you the whole meal.
That joint was the church repast, the styrofoam box, the pound cake, and the little wax paper, the green beans.
It was like he gave you everything. But here's what he says, but the one thing again, and Tyler is, I love what he's doing, but the one thing I felt like it did not go, and this is what I want to get to, is this. He talked about the importance, and I thought he jump started with black Christians being super important in the age that's to come, because we've always known what it's like to be the minority. Mm-hmm. We've always lived that way. Mm-hmm. Our ancestors had to remain faithful to the gospel that way, and on and on and on. And his whole thing, the thing is this, the importance, I want you guys to speak this, that I believe of us building in the way we're building, not the only way, because I believe brothers are going to build straight into a more black space, and people are going to want a white space, whatever. Yeah. But here's the thing, because I believe that in the world that's going to come, Christians are going to become more and more the minority. Yeah. And people who've never had to deal with that don't know how to deal with that. And I think it's super important for us as black people to say, okay, how are we going to help our white brothers and sisters live as followers of Jesus in a culture where we're exiles, where we're in the minority? I think that's so. Yeah, so I want to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I think that's the key word, exiles. Yeah. And I think when you say we know how to be the minority, I think we also know how to live in a land that don't belong to us, but we had to build. And so you read every exile story in the Old Testament. I mean, these folks had to live there, but they couldn't grow but past a certain point. But then Jeremiah tells them, "Nah, man, pray for the peace of the land. Build houses, get married, have children. And in this peace, you will have peace." And so there is so much. When you read the Exodus story and the story of the Israelites, even the Jews going through Holocaust, there's so much with the African-American diaspora that fits that. Yeah. And how do we do it in a way that they say, well, nobody tried to kill your entire race. Now, they didn't, because, I'll say this, I don't want to go I'm not going to go down this bunny trail too far. But I remember I went to, and I love all cultures. I went to the Holocaust Museum in Israel. I mean, it's a moment. It is heavy. It is heavy. And I walked through there, and I didn't feel a shock to my system. I felt a kinsmanship. I was with people who were non-black, that were white American, and they felt the shock to their system. And I realized we had two different emotional experiences. Wow. And for me, I said, man, I'm glad their story is told. I'm glad that people can look and have a place to go and more, and somebody's admitting that these people were done wrong.
Yeah.
My kinsmanship was to the struggle. I was never in slave chains. My last name Johnson, but my DNA said Nigerian. But my last name Johnson. You see what I'm saying? And that's the part that is already messing me up in my identity, And so anyway, so I look at that and this kinsmanship and the struggle. So the biblical history as well as the modern history of these exiled people who are now trying to find themselves the promised land, and find themselves back right with God. And we've been living that as African Americans, specifically, if I say African Americans or black, however people want to name themselves, as people who come from African descent, who live in America, that were born in America, and not you were born in Africa, then lived here. You know what country you're from. You have a different language, different dialect, all of that. So I think one thing that we can help people really understand what it feels like to be an exile and not have a system that's in your favor. Yeah, and so it goes back. Yeah, so, when we talk about conversations about power, the system didn't work for us for a long time. The system was not for us for a long time. The system, matter of fact, told us that we weren't 100% human. Yeah. The system also was able to benefit off our suffering, off our struggle. Our women was used as pleasure and to multiply human beings for workforce. And so the system, when people are upset about, I don't know what the government's going to do, this is your first time feeling like the government's not for you.
Yes. Yeah. So
no matter who's in office, I'm like, I don't expect for the system to work for me. People say, well, this church is going to be in disarray because they're going to take the nonprofit status away. Man. But guess what? I had to do this anyway. When I started off, nobody gave me a $150,000 check to plant this church.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? Nobody gave me a scholarship to do my master's in divinity, so I'm trying to pay off college debt and plant a church and then try to keep my family saved. And so I'm saying that's the part I'm like, I don't expect for the system to work for me. I have a conviction and a calling from God. And I saw how he used prophets who rose up in different times. And I believe that's part of where we're supposed to be, that we still obey our call in the midst of conflict. And that's what we know how to do. Not just that we're minorities. Not just when we don't even have some minorities in America can swing and be still in white favor. We don't have that privilege. We have been treated like terrorists without doing a thing in this country. We are a threat. And so how do I live as a threat? So sometimes a perceived threat, when people come into the church, they have to release what media and history has taught them, even if they're not racist. Who sees a pit bull and says, "Oh, how cute"?
100%.
Right, because majority of the views and the thoughts about the pit bull is that they're ferocious.
Yeah.
But anybody who loves pits, they're going to say, "Man, that's an awesome dog." Yeah. But because of what's been taught, I see a pit. If the pit ain't on the chain, I'm like, "Who pit is this?"
That's what I'm saying, yeah.
And so likewise, I'm saying there is a perceived threat.
Yep.
And so as I live as an exile, recognize I might be a threat. That in my pulpit, I'm Dr. Chris Johnson. At the stoplight, I'm a black man.
And you know what? And I don't even have my sound effects, because if I had my sound effects, I would have hit you with the Rick Ross. But no, and I want you guys and what I want everyone who's listening just to hear this is that this isn't what I want you to get through, hear what's being said, but I always tell people is look at the work, because what you just heard from that is a man who literally is both these men are fully reconciled men. This isn't we jumping up on here and, it's just the moment we're jumping on jumping on white people. Like, we've been building this way before this was, and being this way before it was ever a wave to do this. And I want you guys to get through the look at the work. But what Chris said is so true, because that is the paradox that we live in. Of, like I said, a man who he's a doctor, but then when you in that car, it's like, oh, people gonna think some type of way, and that is and what people don't get is the psychological stuff that does to you. Because after a while, because you hear people say, well, I'm a human being, I'm a man, I have all the stuff everybody has to deal with. But man, the fact of all the time you're going and people are like, I gotta be better, I can't do this, I gotta go and make myself less. I'm like, you don't understand psychologically what that does. Ultimately to a person. But I love what you're saying. It's like, no, we are exiles, and that's why we're in this fight. Because we have a responsibility. Because
one thing you said, looking at the work. Now, look, my church is 54% Caucasian. And so I'm glad you said it's not like, rain on white people. Most of what I'm talking about is history and the internal battle that I had to come to, because we cannot be reconcilers if we are not reconciled within ourselves. And so I have to be able to look at it like this. I have to be able to carry the scar of my father without the wound of my father. My father may have wounds of racism that I would never have to experience. But I get a chance to carry that scar and say it is real. And so the difference between myself and the generation before me of African Americans who dealt with more overt racism is that I can say, you all suffered and endured, so I can have a privilege to make things better. And so as much of this, I have to pay homage to their suffering.
There it is. And that's the real thing. And go ahead. I want you to jump in this, Brian.
First of all, I'm amening so much of what's being said. It's interesting. You used the word kind of, and I know you didn't probably use it in this way, but you talked about privilege. I think about the idea that, so my dad grew up a sharecropper. And I want you to think about that. I'm one generation removed from sharecropping in Virginia. Like, I got to miss school. You can't go to school for a few weeks because you got to go out there and pick some stuff off the ground. Like, that's my uncles, my dad, you know. And I start thinking through, compared to my dad's upbringing, I'm very privileged. And one of the things I think, if you think about what it looks like, I think one of the arguments that people have, is trying to prove that I'm not privileged. But I think that's the wrong conversation. The question should not be whether I'm privileged or not, but how do I use my privilege as a way to serve? How do I make my privilege not just about me and what I can get from it? And so I think when we live out the Philippians 2 life, not only in ourselves, but we disciple people of all ethnicities who are in our church, I think we prepare for what does it look like to go forward. Because if we saw our privilege as primarily serving us, then the moment that privilege seems to be taken away, then we're in, oh my goodness, what are we going to do? I don't have this status anymore. I don't have this, I'm not looked at this way. We're not looked at as favorable in society's eyes anymore.
Yeah.
And that privilege is taken away. And I think it's because we see privilege as the thing that's primarily meant to serve us. But I think when we see it as, no. God, whatever privilege I have, you might have more privilege, I might have less privilege. And as a man, I would say that there's times where I have more privileges than my wife would in certain circumstances. Absolutely. How do I use that? How do I see that and reframe it as I'm not trying to argue and trying to get back my privilege from me, but what I do have, how do I use that to serve others? How do I live Philippians chapter 2? Do not think more highly of yourself than you ought to. Do nothing from selfishness nor empty conceit, but with humility of mind. Let each of you regard one another as more important than yourselves. How do we live that out? And I think that has to be the core of how we lead, what we lead from and what we disciple from, that I think will help, as we talk about, if I can get back to that original question of how do we lead or how do we live as believers, as exiles, in a world where it feels like privilege is being taken away. Mm-hmm. Well, it's reframing how you see privilege in the first place.
Love it.
It was never meant for you. It was meant in service to others.
It was. And I think that it's powerful because ultimately it's the essence of the gospel. It's like what we got. And it's always about, man, whatever you power, privilege, however it's always meant to be given away. When it's hoarded and it's stayed, that's why it does corrupt. Because it's never meant to be, power is never meant to be static. Yeah. Power's always been meant to move. So I tell people when I go work in corporate space, I don't start with race, gender, sexual orientation, stuff like that. I start with power. Because that's this whole thing. This whole reckoning for me is it's all power. Yeah. That's why right now as we're recording this, Cuba, South Africa, Haiti. Yeah. Oh, yeah. This is power. You look at all the stuff. You look across the board. What's happening with, even the stuff, guys. Even to the stuff with technology right now, with NFTs and all these things like that. All those things it's power. It's because now with NFTs and blockchain, it's just now you take out the middleman. See why people get all frustrated. The internet, because why? You start taking out the middle. You start taking out the power structure. What's happening in 2020? It's a power structure. What we saw with Wall Street and Robin Hood and with the Reddit situation, it was power. It's they figure out how to win the game. Now everybody freaked out who was exploiting power. It's all about power, and I really believe what God is saying in our country right now is no. People have not handled power well. Right. But the question is going to be this: I actually believe God is highlighting. Not only, but I really believe God is highlighting very specifically Black people in this moment and hour. And here's the thing I'm asking: what are we going to do with the power we have in our hands? Because what we can do is say, we're going to build our own thing. Or can we actually be what we've hoped for our country to be? And what I realize, that's going to be incredibly painful. Yeah. Because everything in me wants to be like, heck no. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? When you get your chance at the top, oh no, It's about,
by the way, Adrian, I'm glad you said, heck no. I ain't know what we was about to go to.
I
was about to drop something else. You was in the zone.
Hey, it had to beat me, no. But no.
He takes to the streets.
Yeah, I know, but it's that whole thing. And so I guess here's the next question as we start talking about this, because, and this is a real question, because this is a conversation we have to have, and we got to talk about this. The danger of the moment for Black Christians. What is the danger that you guys see for this moment for Black Christians?
DB?
Yep. Sorry.
The danger. I think one of the things that in the world that we live in is that there's not always space given to process. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that I find happening is that there's a compounding challenge that we have to deal with is, one, we are called to lead in the midst of situations and context. And I'm saying that as a pastor, but even if you're not a pastor, you don't have a title in front of your name, at some level you're called to lead, and you've got to give responses, and you've got to give quick responses to complex situations, and you've got to almost. And I talked about this in a panel here recently about the expectations of others. Mm. But sometimes what I find is that I could feel the pressure to be forced to feel what other people expect that I should feel without taking the time to process. Holy Spirit, what is it that you're speaking right now?
Yeah.
And to allow myself the ability to quiet my soul before God in the midst of processing. Because, I think about Jesus as an example for us where he wasn't guided by other people's expectations of what his agenda should be. I mean, could you imagine in the first century Palestine, the expectation from the Zealots, the expectations from, the Essenes? Are we going to just pack up our bags and just kind of remove ourselves and put ourselves in our own bubble? Or the expectations of the Roman Empire? Hey, play along with us. And Jesus didn't allow any of that to drive him.
That's really good. That's really, really good.
He allowed for communion with the Father to direct what he did. And it was often misunderstood by those who are closest to him. And I think one of the dangers for us is that we can find ourselves, and I use the word us on purpose because I think that I can be just as susceptible as anybody else in this, is that I allow myself to be driven by, we ought to say this, we ought to do this. I remember I was in a meeting, it was last summer, with a group of black clergy in Cincinnati. And there was something that came up was, this is our issue. We're going to tackle this issue. And it was surrounding the idea of defunding the police. And I'm not going to say whether that was good or bad, but I just remember feeling like, and even speaking up, saying, I need more clarity. And I need to see what it is that I really think about this and what I believe God is saying about this. I know that if I just played the game and just went along, because I want to be a team player, I don't want to feel like a sellout. I want to feel like I'm for the people. Mm-hmm. But if I did that, then I'm not giving myself permission to hear what the Holy Spirit is speaking and feel like, is this how God is calling me to lead? And on the other end, I don't want to find myself being quiet at times where I need to speak up. Because the expectation is, let's just all get along and let's don't rock the boat. Mm-hmm. And so giving myself, the failure to give ourselves as black Christians the opportunity to process, to feel, to grieve, to pray, and not just react to what we think everybody wants us to react to.
It's incredible. That's good.
Yeah.
That's really good.
Chris? Yeah. So the danger of black Christians at this time, two things come to mind is if we allow any one people group to define our faith.
Yeah.
Whether it's a white Christianity or black Christianity, Middle Eastern Christianity, whatever, if we to relegate God to people's image versus we are all created in God's image. So there is a mass exodus of black people coming out of multi-ethnic spaces. And also there are several black Christians or who would have been Christians that now say, okay, that's the white man's religion. There's nothing new under the sun. Malcolm X would stand outside of churches and say, did the white man's religion fix what you were looking for? And then so the Nation of Islam began to have this swell because what they were promoting was black excellence and stability. And I think we've had a Christianity that was void of promoting healthy things, not just holy things. And so our Christianity is becoming more holistic because some of the constructs, the cultural constructs, are being rattled. When we could not meet, there was social constructs of our Christianity that had to change. And so that was not, that I didn't care what ethnicity is, you could not come together and gather. Then the civil unrest happened. And so then at that point, it's like, well, when I gather, who do I want to gather with? Then the political season happened. Then it's like, well, if I gather here, am I still a Christian? Because there was such a Messiah complex placed on one candidate. And then there was such a, this is unbiblical on this side. And so that polarization happened. And so one thing is we will begin to allow a people group to define God if we're not careful. Whether it is white man's Christianity or now I have my own version as a black man because what they had was not it. So then I separate it. The second thing is the root of bitterness.
There we go.
Because we, as black folks who have made the leap to say we're going to be multi-ethnic, or I'm going to be the friendly black person and I'm going to be there, and then to feel like you were done wrong, now it's like, I hate this, but it's like I was on stage with you, but you pants me. You pulled my pants down in front of everybody, and now I feel exposed, and that's shame. So when you talk about 2008, but I think there's a new level of shame that people are going to feel. And they said, man, I gave myself to what we thought that we were in this together. I said brother, sister, and I legit meant brother and sister. And that's how you meant brother and sister. Then maybe I'm not a brother or a sister. And so then who am I? And now because of that, you have Killmonger who shows up, but what Killmonger embodied was a bitterness. And whoever it was towards, but that bitterness of I was done wrong, I was left, I was orphaned, I was abandoned. And so bitterness will hurt us. It'll erode every relationship. It will erode every work that we do if we're not careful. And that thing is a bitter drink out here. It's like a fountain drink with free refills. We have so much stuff we could be bitter about. And I say that includes hurt, that includes anger, that includes unforgiveness. That also includes that I felt who I thought was my family was not. That's it. Especially when you talk about in church. Church hurt is already some of the worst hurt. It's a place where we count ourselves most vulnerable. And we say, man, this place can really change us. And so that's already a psychological phenomenon. And even Barna, who does a lot of the Pew Research stuff, they're starting to do more research on the black church right now. So I'm saying that the danger is, one, we will create God in our image, or either allow God to be created in the image of another ethnic group or gender. Two is that we will walk from this moment with a root of bitterness versus allowing the pain to push us to progression.
And I love it. And the reason why I wanted to bring that up is because of this. It's because I think it's important for black people to talk about, because that's not a conversation that's having, to where not to say, hey, you don't, and again, what we're not saying is like, part of healing is, part of the process of healing is anger. You know what I'm saying? Like anger is a part of the process of healing. And that's and the reason why I wanted to bring this up is because it's saying like, hey, not to be angry, but we know anger, sin, not whatever. But one of the issues that we have, and I understand from white brothers and sisters who want to step in, because one of the biggest fears, and I get it, that they see is, this is about to go. They start looking at the other side. Well, man, this is going to this could go to an ugly place in their minds or whatever. And my thing, I tell them, say, listen, that's one of those moments. It's like one of those conversations where you're like, you don't need to step into that one. You know what I'm saying? Unless you've gotten access, unless somebody is under unless somebody say, this is my pastor, and you say, hey, but after you've allowed them to have room, because please understand this, black people have just begun to really process this stuff. We've just begun. Well, when is this going to be over? I'm like, fam, no time soon. We just started. You know what I'm saying? I mean, you're like, I'm like, so now, because I feel like, all we doing, in churches is, really, this whole thing centering black voices. I think that's kind of wrong. I'm like, no, here's the point. When there's been what Chris said earlier, I have nobody to look towards. Now we're actually talking about it more. We're pushing it more to the middle, but we didn't even get to the middle. We didn't even get to the edges because we have been so outside. And so now trying to push theologians and preachers and all that, and realizing, oh no, this guy is good. Because let me tell you, you can say whatever you want and whatever about TD Jakes. What I am going to tell you is this: very few people are embodying the gospel like that man does in his city.
Right.
When you go there and you're like, man, the rehab facility, the job placement stuff. I mean, they're buying. I mean, literally just bought property next to Tyler Perry in Atlanta to build a black community, empowerment of people. I mean, doing all this stuff, and I'm like, yo, he is embodying the gospel. And I'm like, okay, you can have some disagreements, and that's fine, but you can't dismiss all the work, and that's the issue. You can't dismiss, because here's my point. You are going into a fight with the dude has a machine gun and you have a water pistol. I'm like, what are you arguing? The fruit of that man's life?
Yeah.
Right.
How crazy do you sound? Yeah. And but I'm like, but I used to feel the same way. Oh no, TD. Oh, his view of the Trinity. I can't. No, man. So it dismisses his whole work. I'm like,
dismiss his whole
But let me ask
work.
you a question. But now say, okay, we never dismiss Martin Luther's views of Jews and women. We never miss the views of people like George Whitefield.
Right.
Yeah.
Who owned slaves.
Right.
We're like, oh, look, I'm like, come on. Like, but that's the stuff everybody's waking up to. And we're like, oh, and that's why we want to push, because there are some incredible, even me, that's the part, again, you hit the other shame parts. I'm like, man, there's some people I'm learning about. I'm like, how did I've been serving G for 20 some odd years.
Never knew.
Yeah.
I never knew. These are some incredible, like theologians who understand, who like, oh, it would have helped me. But I was taught, not sometimes very directly, indirectly, that wasn't good enough.
Yeah.
That wasn't good enough. And I'll tell the story and we'll move on. I'll never forget my grandfather one time looked at me in my eyes. I mean, my grandfather was a Black Baptist preacher. And so, I was heavy reform, right? As a reform. I looked at him, I was like, and I'll never forget that. I look back and I'm so embarrassed. I did like, Granddad, like, what about, man, like, it's always, the shooting to the stars and the moon and the hype and the life after all this. What about now and sin and the gospel and, and suffering? And dude, in the most loving grandfather way, he looked right at me and was like, grandson, why Black preachers have preached like this for so long? Because we didn't have to think or guess or feel. We knew times a million what hell was going to be, because we was living a little bit of it.
Yeah.
Man, he said, that's one of the moments you say something, you're like, but you like, you sit there, you're like, ain't no book, ain't nothing. That came from like a place of real life. If that came from like, I lived this. And I was like, in that moment, it gave me such empathy. I'm like, oh, he lived something a little bit different. Because as we come to a close, there's a couple of things I do want to dive into really fast. Is this, because, we talk about moving forward. What are, in you guys' opinion, ways? Because the one thing is this, I know everybody thinks, man, what do I do next? What do I do next? But I do think this is important that we start having the conversation of now, like, what's next? Because I think, not that we're not going to, some places are just starting to have the conversation, what's going on. But I want to start, I'm always like, man, how are we going to, what's next? So I want to, maybe you talk about in your own context, what you're doing, or what you actually feel is next, and actually building. Because remember, I always tell people, it's okay to be an activist, but at the end of the day, as a follower of Jesus, you are a reconciler person. You can have activism, but your calling, because of what the Bible tells us, is that we are all called to be ministers of reconciliation. First, God, us to God, us to, we just said we are ultimately the bridge to Jesus. Jesus is the bridge to God, right? And this idea, we are ministers there, and then ministers of one another. So I guess I'm going to ask you guys, in the embodiment of it, what does this look like next to really begin to build, to move forward? So, whoever one of y'all want to go first? Yeah,
I went first last time. So.
Come
on now.
Yeah, I think the thought of moving forward, one, I'm glad we have an opportunity to move forward.
Yeah.
Like, just straight up. I'm in that old school. He woke me up this morning, hold me in my right mind, started me on my way. I'm just glad to be here. He didn't have to let me live. Like, I heard that from testimony services, but now I know. And so I'm glad we have a chance to move forward. I'm glad we have a chance to have these conversations where we're having them. I'm glad that we have a chance to have relationships with mighty fine non-Black Christian brothers and sisters that can help us move forward. One, when things started really popping off last year, I spoke to my church and I said, hey, we were built for this. We were built for this. This shouldn't shock us. Like, it's crazy, but we were built for such a time as this. So now let's act like it. It's like having an emergency fund, in your finances. Dave Ramsey tells the story in Financial Peace. The lady leaves one of his conventions and her axle fell out. And so she goes back. She said, Dave, I've been doing everything you told me to do, and my axle fell out. He said, do you have an emergency fund? She said, yeah. He said, how much does the axle cost? She said, $1,200. He said, how much is in your emergency fund? She said, $3,000. He says, no longer an emergency. Wow. We are sometimes still programmed to think with a level of poverty, even when we have been given wealth. And so I've been given wealth, my privilege. I've been given wealth to have a multi-ethnic church. I know it's possible. There was one time I stood up, I said, y'all, do y'all think this was a failed social experiment? You know what I mean? But I believe, so one, for those who've been doing the work of reconciliation, the devil's attempt is to wear us out. So let me say this, keep doing what you're doing. That's one way we move forward. Really so we sharpen our axe head in this time. That's what has happened. We should sharpen our axe head. And so when we swing, we'll be able to go further. The other part, we're not going to be able to go forward without each other. God has designed us as human beings. I don't care what your color, height, weight, whatever you get. He's designed us as human beings to move forward together. And so that unity piece is not uniformity. I think is meant to represent the beautiful tapestry of our differences. And so I think moving together in that, within my context, man, I am trying to be intentional with empowering people from in a diverse way, that I don't want to create clones. I don't want people, sometimes I can have a dominant personality, a dominant ministry style. I don't want people to think that's the gold standard. And so I don't want to be enthralled with myself. And the other thing is, I would say forgiveness. We have to learn forgiveness.
Have you ever thought about forgiveness though? I mean, I think we probably should think about that.
I think we should add that to the pot. I think we should try to forgive, man. Because if we don't learn that, we're not going to be able to reconcile on very personal levels. People out here trying to reconcile this ethnic divide, but their marriage falling apart. I'm like, come on now, you can't if my kids, I learn the rhythm of reconciliation and restoration within my closest relationships, my friendships, and in my family. And so if I don't do it there, it's going to be very difficult for me to do it on a platform. And so I want us to get it deep down in us that we move from a place of performance to a place of living it. And if you live a reconciled life, your programs will catch up with your life. The thing is, people trying to do programmatic stuff, but if we live it, so who are the people? Who are the people you can call on that look like you? Look different than you, talk different than you, that may even disagree with you some way, but there's a close bond. So we got to live it, man. Man. So we got a lot of information. We don't have a lot of application.
I love it. And I love it. And one of the things I do like so much about what you always talk about, it's so much rooted in this idea is that it has to start from internal, like this internal work that leads to external. Because everything you talk about, we're going to forgiveness. You got to live it. And it's all from an internal work. And I think so many times everybody wants to go with, honestly, I think even in gospel, quote unquote, gospel churches, they literally operate many times the pattern of Babylon because it's cognitive behavioral first versus emotional experiential, right? Because everything we do is an overflow of the internal work that's happened. And now the fruit, just what it is. And I think we try to go based on programs because it's programs because, man, that's just the thing that we can do. When you start on program, now again, it should be a manifestation, but you should have things that you do, but it has to be from a motivation of, this is real in me. Because you can never produce something you ain't. You cannot do it. And so I love the internal part of what you just said. What about you?
Yeah, one of the things you're talking about is just that weariness that comes against us. That's one of the things I was going to say as a follow-up to some of the greatest dangers for Black Christians is just being weary of the conversation, getting fatigued of feeling like I've got to forgive again. I got to come back to the table and forgive again. I forgave back here. And by the way, I shouldn't have to. And so if there's a fatigue. And so I think we've got to, I think one of the most basic steps for next steps is continue taking steps to the well. Going to the well in terms of, the scripture keeps coming to my mind as I'm thinking here, 2 Corinthians 4, and I actually have other things I want to add to it because don't want it to be trite as if I'm just kind of giving a nice Bible nicety and just kind of but it's deeply rooted in my own conviction, and it actually gives me fuel to continue on. But I think about 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 16 through 20. It says, therefore, we do not lose heart, though outwardly we're wasting away, yet inwardly we're being renewed day by day. For our light and momentary afflictions are producing for us an eternal weight of glory, which far outweighs them all. So I fix my eyes, and that's the key. I fix my eyes, not on the things which are seen, but on the things which are unseen. For the things which are seen are temporary, the things that are unseen are eternal. And so how do I help to fix my eyes on that which is eternal to help direct me of how I continue strong in that which is temporary? And I think that is where we've got to, we cannot, and I don't know if it's a next step or if it's a continued step, but we have to continue to believe, to preach, to confess hope. And I'm not saying hope void of action.
Yep.
But definitely hope, because action void of hope, that's a recipe for disaster and burnout. And so I think that's a starting step, right?
Yeah.
Is reminding ourselves to do that. But I think along with that, I think I think different churches are at different places. So I will say this. So for some churches, you've got to ask yourself, is this really a conviction? This whole idea.
It's a great point, man.
The multi-ethnic dream. Like it was great. Right? Do we still believe in it now? Like, because if it wasn't a conviction, if it was a matter of convenience, then this is about the time where you say, you know what, that was good. That was nice.
Hey, that SpongeBob me. All right, I'm going to head out.
I'm going to head out. And that's not blasting anybody who has felt called in a different direction, but make sure you're called out of it, not just you leave out of it. So, I think that there needs to be that conviction. Am I willing? And I think beyond that, I think there has to be, for those who are in leadership in the church, I think you have to go back to examining my privilege, preference, and power. Have I been willing to give it away? And if I look in areas where it's preferences of my culture that has dominated, then I have to say, where do I give away preference? Maybe musically, stylistically. And yes, it's true. If you're leading an organization or you're leading a church, many times it's going to reflect some of the personality of the leader. But that does not mean that there's not times to give it away. Power. What power do I need to give away? It's like I want diversity up to the point that it costs me my power. Mm-hmm. But are we willing to give away power? Mm-hmm. Are we willing to give away privilege? Which means that part of privilege is I expected everybody to assimilate to my normal. Mm-hmm. Am I willing to give away that privilege? Am I willing to give away so I think that needs to be a hard, courageous conversation between you and the Lord, and between you and some trusted friends within your organization, and put your defenses down and listen. Because I think people have looked, there was a time where, the idea of being a multi-ethnic church was, okay, here's what you got to do. You got to get, maybe get a worship leader of someone of the different ethnicity.
Yeah. There's a recipe to it.
Yeah, there's a recipe to it. Or maybe you do Kirk Franklin, Chris Tomlin, and then do Israel to kind of wrap it all up.
Oh, no, man, you got to put a hymn in there. Put a hymn in there.
Yeah. Throw a hymn in there too if you want to extend it, and I don't think it's that recipe. I think we got to go deeper in terms of,
that's it.
Have I been willing to give these things up, or have I made it an idol? And if so, then repent. Repent and constantly repent.
Yeah, can I jump in? It's crazy because what you're talking about when we put these recipes together in spiritual spaces that don't require God, that's paganism.
Yeah.
Ooh. And so we've tried to paganize the diverse church. and say, if I got part A, part B, part C, it's going to produce D.
Yeah.
That's paganism.
Wow.
The diverse multi-ethnic church was birthed from Pentecost. It was a work of the Holy Spirit as a witness to the gospel that tore down the wall of hostility. And so until we come there, everything else we do is only going to be surface. Yeah. And whatever we produce is not going to last that long. Mm-hmm. So what happened is, when you think about the unshakable faith that we're supposed to have, he said, once again, I'm going to shake things. This is Hebrews 13. Mm-hmm. And he says, and whatever is shakeable will be shaken. Yeah. And I think this nuance of the multi-ethnic church has been shaken, because there was this pagan approach to what only the Spirit could do. We're pretty much like Simon the sorcerer. We paid for it. So let me hire the minority teaching pastor. Let me hire the worship leader that look different to be able to reach the different people. And I'm not saying strategy is not bad. But I'm saying, am I led by the Spirit? Have I built this relationship and say, wow, this is why God brought us together to do this? Yep. You know what I mean? And so I think that's just such a key thing. Yeah. Because we'll try to placate into, we'll end up placating into this paganism.
Yeah.
Listen, and what you just said is powerful because of what you just said. Because at the end of the day, then it's not, if we can create it, then it's God gets no glory for it. Because like I said, even when I'm sitting here and I'm like, listen, and I know both of you guys, I know how both of you guys are, and I look and I know how both of you guys' churches are, and I'm like, yeah, there's no way. There's no way the church should be this multi-ethnic. Yeah. People at our church are like, there's no way our church, being in the South, doing what we do, like, it should be there's no way. Right. And people ask me, because I have no option. People are like, well, how's your church? I'm like, I can say all the stuff, and here's some things that kind of happen. I'm like, I literally mean it when I say, God. Like, I really mean that, because it makes zero sense. Mm-hmm. It makes zero sense how hard in the paint sometimes I go at people. It makes no sense. The more I become unapologetically black, the more I look around, I'm like, oh, man, it's like a lot more white folk in here now. You know what I'm saying? And it's like, you look out, you got brother in camo, you got some good old boy. I mean, I'm like, kind of like, it's God. You know what I'm saying? And I think that's incredibly important. And I think that as we close, one of the things for me, and I think this is one of the things I've been feeling like for more of a because I'm always thinking, you guys know this about being in your future. So okay, what kind of going forth, and where I cannot get past. Everything is probably we talked about Jeremiah 29, you know what I'm saying? Being in exile. But one of the big things that stuck with me has been there is this, it's in Nehemiah 8. This idea is in October, when the Israelites had settled in their towns, all the people assembled with a unified purpose at the square just outside the Watergate. They asked Ezra the scribe to bring out the book of the law of Moses, which the Lord had given for Israel to obey. See, up until that, the law of God was there. People had no desire for it. But I believe you're talking about what's next. It's what Nehemiah did. It's the generations of Nehemiahs. It's the generation of reformers who are saying, I'm going to go into places and solve problems. Because he met financial. They were in financial ruin. They had moral ruin. So he's a moral leader where he could have taken and manipulated. He could have done what most leaders do. Hey, my privilege. Well, Brian, you got to take my privilege, and I'm going to I'm going to take more power, more money, take from the king. No, he fed everybody from his own pocket and did things like that, and on and on and on. All the stuff he did, and then they saw the miracle of God, where he builds a wall, where it took him years. They do it in 52 days. Like, he does this amazing thing, and then what happens? The people, like Ezra, the pastor don't have to show up. Hey, let me tell you about the gospel. They said, no. Tell me about this. Like, bring the law, bring the word of God. So we want it because they solve problems. And that is where it happens. So people ask me, what's next? I'm like, here's my thing. Going with both you guys said, what is the Spirit of God saying? Where there needs to be fulfilled, and go meet them. And go meet them. And you know what you do? You just tell a story. Yeah. Because as you tell the story, listen, the story don't need I tell people, the story of God needs no extra sauce. Come on. The story of God needs no extra add, don't need no extra add to it. The story, just tell the story and let him do what he's going to do. And that's what I think, because when you do that, we cannot take any credit. And see why I believe we are sitting in such an incredible moment is because it will be to what happened? How did you do this? What is going on? And you can just say, it's but God. Like it's but God. Yeah. That's all it is, because what we're doing doing is we're meeting needs. And so people, so what does that mean? Oh, right now there's a report that's came out. There's a $220 billion wealth gap among people. So what does that mean? If you're a finance person, if you are an entrepreneur, whatever. Okay, man, what does that mean? How do I begin to now use my skills, my gifts to go into a minority community to say no? And, again, if you talk so much about, hey, don't give them subs, lift them up. Okay, you go do it. Stop, you talk about, federal government. Yeah. Stop asking for the federal government or somebody else. No, you go into the communities. Yeah. And then you know what? You go and you start building and you start helping. Man, for others, man, healthcare, whatever that is, go. If you are a black brother and sister in here, there is a mental health crisis in our country, but very specifically toward those who are white. And so say you are black and you know what? And you say, man, I see a mental health. I'm a mental health expert. Mm-hmm. Well, you know what? Man, one way for you, go to your predominantly white privileged schools and say, hey, man, how can I serve here? Mm-hmm. I'm going to give my time. Because see, now you're like, what are you doing here? Well, yeah, I can serve my community too, but I'm going to go over here too. Because why? Now, all of a sudden, because what people need to see is they need to see, there's a black man or woman or a person of color with a skill set. And then we don't need you just to come on our side. No, we come on your side to help you get better. Yeah. See, when you start doing that, that's how it is about solving problems. So at the end of the day, I tell people prophetically, what do you do next? It's about solving problems. Mm-hmm. It's not about talking anymore. What are the problems? And you know what you do? Go ask God. Go seek after his face. Yeah. And God, tell me where to go solve problems. And if you go solve problems, you go and you answer them. And those could be nonprofit, for-profit. Yeah. Out in here, I got a guy who I had him on a podcast the other day, and I don't even know where he's at in his faith, but he started a for-profit company. And it all was birthed out of this reality. Wow. It was birthed out of reality. He's going into prison systems. And it was because of the story of his mom writing him a letter when he was 15 years of age. And I think he may be a follower of Jesus, but 15 years of age. And went to big boy prison at 15. Gets out, and the only way he survives is his mother every single day wrote him a letter. Mm-hmm. Every day, same note. Here's what he's done. Went on, came out, this incredible thing, built this construction company. You can go, his name is, again, you can go find it. The company's called Flick Shop. And man, and what happened was that at the end, what he ends up doing is now, he was like, he's making all this money traveling, and he realized, man, some of my friends in there, but he's like, I can't write them letters like my mom did. Right. So what does he do? He's like, man, technology creates an app. Now the app's what? You can take a picture, write a letter, you send it in to them, pay a little bit of money, and what do? They print a postcard and send it to any prison. Yeah. And so here's the point. It's motivated for him. He's like, because I remember where I was at. Yeah. So that man starts a for-profit company that has social impact. Yeah. So sometimes that's the thing I'm thinking of people raising up in our generation. It doesn't have to just be a social thing. You can have a for-profit thing that has social impact because you know what that does? That meets a need. And you know also there's funding. You know what that funding can go to? More stuff, more church planners, more stuff you can do. That's how I believe we've got to begin to start thinking in the age that's to come. Yeah. So
what that requires is a certain level of willingness to hear the direction of the Holy Spirit. Yep. Because it means that I don't have a cookie cutter way of doing things. Yeah. And I'll end with this thought unless you have more, but I look at the three of us. We have a lot of things in common, but we're very different in our personality, temperament, preaching style. I've heard both of you preach. Yep. You've heard me preach. Mm-hmm. I've been in leadership environments with both of you. We have a lot of similarities, but we're different. Yeah. And I think the beauty of it is God was able to take a Chris Johnson, an Adrian Crawford, and a Brian Taylor and do something beautiful with three black men leading as pastors, which should show anybody that you don't have to look like me in order to do it. You don't have to sound like me in order to do it. Mm-hmm. You don't have to go the exact path that I went through. But what you do have to do is you have to be willing to listen to how God is leading you. Yeah. That's it. You have to be willing to have a conviction. You have to be willing to say, God, let me be surrounded by other people moving in a positive direction that's honoring God. And God will use you, who you are, not who you think you're supposed to be.
Right. Love it. I love it. Well, fellas, again, I know we could go on. I feel like this is about to turn into a Joe Rogan podcast. And Joe, you ever see Joe Rogan? I'm thinking like 4 hours. You know what I'm saying? Like we get Joe Rogan. I'll be like, Joe, man. I'm like, man, when you see that Joe, he's like, you listen to that Joe Rogan? I'm like, yeah, I'll be done there. I'll be done. Yeah. 2 point. I'll be done next week. You know what I'm saying? So, but fellas, like, listen, I really appreciate that. I really appreciate you guys spending time doing that, adding value. And I hope more than anything else for everyone that's listening to this is as you hear this conversation, is the fact of this is now, like we always say, is taking theology, taking the stuff you've heard and is bringing it down to real life every single day. So the point now comes back to you is not to, it's to say, okay, what's my next step? For some of you, maybe it's to begin a conversation. For some of you, it's repentance. For some of you, man, it's going before God, hearing what he has to say. But what we want to do is, we always say this, man, we love moments, but we live for movements. And so the idea is this: let this moment that we're having right now, the moment of this, to stop you to go to a movement, to begin to take a next step. Because when you create movements, I always tell people, the thing we desire to create, this idea of innovative radical, is a movement. Because the beauty of a movement is you can't really control it. You can't control a movement. You know what I'm saying? Let me tell you this. You can kind of, at some level, you can control a local church. You can't control a movement. And the idea is that means because people take what you have birthed there, and then they going. And they go, and they see, you hear 5 generations later, like, oh, yeah, man, hey, I was in your church. Like, what happened? Oh, yeah, I started this thing over here. And you have no idea what's going on. And that's what we want you to do, is to create a movement. And so, guys, we'll be back with you soon on Street Theology.